Confessions, how? My twin's betrayal shattered my world. Here's why. I thought my twin brother was the golden child, loved by our parents while I was left in the shadows until he slipped me a secret USB that exposed their lies. What I found shattered our family and changed everything. Want to know the truth they tried to bury? The Carter house stood in the quiet suburban neighborhood like a monument to perfection, at least on the outside. With its brick facade and neatly manicured lawn, it looked like every other house in the neighborhood. But inside, behind the warm glow of the lamps and the hum of family dinners, lay a different story. It was a place where love was measured, where worth was determined by comparison, and where Ethan Carter had always felt like he was falling short. At 17, Ethan was a sensitive, hard-working boy. He spent hours doing chores around the house, sweeping the floors, arranging the piles of paperwork his mother had scattered on the kitchen counter. He wanted to be noticed, to be loved. But no matter how hard he tried, it never seemed to be enough. Ethan had always been compared to Ryan, his twin brother, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. It was a label Ethan could never escape, no matter how much he excelled at school or helped around the house. Ryan was everything Ethan wasn't confident, effortlessly charming, and always the favorite. He never had to work as hard for approval because it was freely given. Their parents, Richard and Laura, poured their praise onto Ryan like an endless fountain, while Ethan's efforts were met with indifference or, worse, criticism. Ethan's mind was racing as he wiped down the kitchen counters. He knew that after he was done, Ryan would likely be outside with their father, shooting hoops or working on a car, receiving the kind of attention Ethan could only dream of. It hurt. It always hurt. But he didn't let it show. He wasn't allowed to show weakness, especially not when Ryan was around. The sound of laughter floated through the open window, followed by the rhythmic thumping of a basketball bouncing on the driveway. Ethan's stomach twisted as he glanced outside, watching his twin, effortlessly making shots with their father. There was a part of Ethan that hated it, but he also longed for that same connection, that bond. Maybe, if he could just be better, just a little better, maybe then his father would look at him the way he looked at Ryan. His thoughts were interrupted by the sharp voice of his mother calling from the living room. "Ethan, I need you to put those papers in order. And don't forget to clean the bathroom," she ordered, her voice cold and detached. Ethan nodded, not daring to respond. He grabbed the papers she'd scattered on the counter and walked to the living room, his mind buzzing with a million thoughts. But nothing could drown out the sting of the words his mother had said earlier that week, after he had spent hours working on his science project. "Why can't you be more like Ryan? He's always so quick with things. Why do you have to make everything so difficult?" Her voice had been laced with disappointment. Ethan had swallowed the lump in his throat, but inside, it hurt more than anything. In the living room, Ryan sat casually on the couch, flipping through a magazine, his usual relaxed posture radiating confidence. He barely looked up as Ethan entered, his eyes flicking toward him only for a second before returning to his magazine. Ethan set the papers down on the coffee table, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to push the hurt away. "Dad says you'll never be as good as Ryan at basketball," Ethan muttered under his breath, though he hadn't meant to say it aloud. Ryan gave him a quick glance, his lips curling into a faint smirk. "Maybe you should try harder." "Then," he said, his voice teasing but with a hint of something more, something that made Ethan uncomfortable. "It's not that hard. You just have to try." Ethan clenched his fists. He didn't want to fight with Ryan. He didn't want to feel this resentment. But how could he not? It was as if the world saw Ryan as perfect, and Ethan was just there. He didn't want to admit it, but he could feel it eating at him. Later that evening, Richard and Laura sat down to dinner, their conversation revolving around Ryan's latest achievements. Ryan was the center of attention. As always, he had just won another award at school, and his father was beaming with pride. "Ryan, I'm so proud of you," Richard said, his voice full of admiration. "You've really outdone yourself this time. You've got a bright future ahead of you." "Son," Ethan sat quietly at the dinner table, picking at his food. He had been working on his own achievements, but no one ever seemed to notice. He was just a shadow in their eyes, never the one to get the praise. Ryan had everything. Ryan was everything. Ethan was left in the margins, trying so hard to get noticed, but only ever being compared to someone who could do no wrong. After dinner, Ethan was tasked with cleaning up the dishes. He didn't mind doing the work, but the familiar sting of inadequacy was always there, a constant reminder that no matter how hard he tried, he was never enough. That night, Ethan lay in his bed, staring up at the ceiling. He could hear the muffled sound of Ryan laughing with their father outside, and the weight of it all settled over him. He was good at so many things. He worked hard, but it didn't matter. Ryan would always be the favorite, and he was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, he would never be enough. His thoughts drifted to the past, a memory that still haunted him. He was 12 years old, and it was a rainy afternoon. Ethan had accidentally knocked over a vase that had belonged to their mother for years. She had loved that vase, and when it shattered, her anger was immediate and fierce. You're useless. Ethan, how could you be so careless, she had yelled, her voice full of disdain. Ryan had been the one to break the glass on the door, but their mother had quickly forgiven him, patting him on the back and telling him it was an accident. She had scolded Ethan, though, and the hurt had stayed with him. Ethan closed his eyes and let out a shaky breath. He had been trying so hard to be better, to make them proud, but it felt like every time he took a step forward, they pushed him 2 steps back. A few weeks later, Ethan received a letter from Worthington University. He had applied for a scholarship, but he didn't really believe it would happen. He had been trying so hard, but his parents never saw it. They never really believed in him. When he opened the letter, his heart stopped. He had been accepted, and more than that, he had earned a full scholarship, a chance, a real chance to prove he was worth something. With trembling hands, Ethan ran down the stairs to share the news. He could already picture it, his parents, finally looking at him with pride. For once, they would see him for who he was, and maybe, just maybe, they would finally recognize his worth. But when he burst into the living room, Richard and Laura barely looked up from their conversation. Richard scowled. You got a scholarship. Huh, and what about Ryan? He's worked just as hard. Ethan froze. His dream, his achievement, felt like nothing. He wasn't the golden child. He wasn't Ryan. His parents didn't care. Ethan started, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't know what to say anymore. Ryan, sitting on the couch with a smug expression, didn't even acknowledge Ethan's victory. There was no congratulations, no warmth, just silence. Ethan's heart sank, but something inside him hardened. He would go to Worthington, no matter what. This was his chance to escape. This was his chance to change the way his family saw him. As he stood there, staring at his family, he realized that maybe this scholarship wasn't just about academics, it was his way out. Ethan had never experienced a moment quite like this. The letter from Worthington University lay in his hands like a lifeline, its weight both heavy and light. He had worked for months, pouring his heart into his studies, staying up late into the night, trying to make sense of everything, his place in the world, his place in his family, and now, the hard work had paid off. He could hardly contain his excitement. Ethan sprinted down the stairs, his heart pounding in his chest, the letter clutched tightly in his hands. He could already picture the look on his parents' faces. He imagined them smiling, proud of him for the first time in his life, finally seeing him for who he really was. He imagined his father lifting him up, clapping him on the back, saying the words Ethan had waited so long to hear. We're proud of you, son. His mind raced ahead of him, imagining the family gathered around, sharing in his joy. He could almost hear the congratulatory cheers, feel the embrace of his parents. This was it. This was his moment. But when Ethan burst into the living room, full of hope, the room fell silent. Richard, his father, was sitting on the couch, flipping through the newspaper. Laura, his mother, was in the kitchen, her back turned as she stirred something on the stove. And Ryan was lounging on the couch, casually flipping through his phone, barely even acknowledging Ethan's presence. Ethan's heart dropped, but he pushed the feeling away. This was his time. He held up the letter, his voice trembling with excitement. I got in. I got the scholarship to Worthington University. It's a full ride. There was a moment of stillness. Then Richard slammed his hand down on the armrest of the couch, making Ethan jump. How dare you steal that opportunity from Ryan? Richard's voice was sharp, full of anger. Ethan froze, the joy he had felt a moment ago evaporating like smoke. What, Dad? You've always been selfish. Ethan. Laura's voice cut through from the kitchen. She appeared in the doorway, her eyes wide with disbelief, her face flushed with emotion. This isn't about you. You've hurt your brother. Do you understand Ryan worked just as hard? He deserves this more than you ever could. Ryan's eyes, usually filled with confidence, now seemed cold. He didn't even look at Ethan as he muttered, Yeah, great job. Ethan, you really screwed things up for all of us. His voice was laced with jealousy, and Ethan could see the resentment in his brother's gaze. But there was something more beneath it, something that made Ethan feel a twist of unease. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he wondered if his dream, his success, had been a mistake. He had worked so hard for this. Why was it not good enough? Richard stood up, his face red with fury. You don't get it, do you? You've always been in Ryan's shadow, and now you've gone and taken something that should have been his. He glared at Ethan, his voice dripping with contempt. We didn't raise you to be like this. We raised you to support your brother, not steal his opportunities. Ethan felt the sting of his father's words like a slap to the face. The harshness of the rejection left him speechless. He had done everything right. Why didn't they see it? Why did nothing ever seem to be enough? He turned to Ryan, searching for some sign of support, but his twin brother's eyes remained cold, indifferent. Ethan had always tried to win his approval, but now it felt like he was facing a wall. No matter what he did, No matter how hard he worked, it would never be enough for them. Just as Ethan opened his mouth to respond, there was a knock at the door. The moment was broken. Ethan's eyes flickered toward the door, but he didn't have time to wonder. Richard's voice boomed again. "Go on, Ethan," Richard sneered. "Go back to your room. Let us deal with this mess." "You've done enough." Ethan didn't argue. He simply turned and walked out of the room, the weight of their words pressing down on him. The excitement that had once burned in his chest was now replaced with a crushing sense of failure. The next few days passed in a blur. Ethan tried to focus on his studies, tried to block out the accusations and the hurt, but it was impossible. Then, just when he thought things couldn't get worse, they did. Mrs. Thompson, the school's guidance counselor, called him into her office. The room was small, with posters on the walls advertising college fairs and scholarship opportunities. But there was no joy in her voice when she spoke. "Ethan, I need to speak with you about your scholarship application," she said, her face tight with concern. "It seems there's been a problem." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What do you mean? There are allegations of plagiarism." "Your essay, the one you submitted for the scholarship, matches a paper that's available online. We've found evidence that suggests it wasn't your work." Ethan felt his knees buckle. "What? That's impossible. I didn't cheat." I swear, his voice cracked. But Mrs. Thompson didn't seem convinced. "I understand this is difficult to hear," she said gently, "but the evidence is clear. We've flagged the paper, and I've been instructed to report it to the university." The next few hours felt like a blur. Ethan was sent home, his scholarship in jeopardy. He tried to explain to his parents, to plead his case, but the cold response from Richard was all he received. "Don't come back here." "Ethan," Richard texted him later that night, "we don't need a cheater in this house." The words hit Ethan like a blow to the chest. He was standing on the edge of everything he had worked for, and now it was crumbling. He had done nothing wrong, but it felt like his whole life was falling apart, alone, standing in the rain outside their house. Ethan felt the weight of everything. The house, once his home, now felt like a prison. The lights were on, but it no longer felt like a place he belonged. He couldn't stay here. Not with everything falling apart. Ethan grabbed his backpack and, with his heart pounding, walked away from the house. The rain soaking his clothes, his soul heavier than ever. He couldn't go back. He didn't belong there anymore. His only hope, his only escape, was Michael, his godfather. Michael had always been there for him, even when no one else had. Ethan didn't know what to do, but he knew Michael was the only one who would believe him, the only one who wouldn't turn his back on him. As he stood on the sidewalk, looking back one last time at the house, Ethan made his decision. He couldn't stay in the place that had never truly been home. He needed to find the truth, to find his place in the world. And so, with his bag slung over his shoulder, Ethan walked toward the only person who had ever shown him unconditional love. He wasn't sure what would come next, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Michael would help him. Michael would help him make it right. Ethan had never felt more lost than when he walked away from the only life he had known. But now, as he stood in front of Michael's cozy little home in the suburbs, he felt a small spark of hope flicker inside him. This was where he would find solace, where he would finally be heard and understood. Michael had always been there for him quietly, but consistently. He had been Ethan's godfather since birth. But more importantly, he had been a source of unconditional support. Michael's house, a small but warm space filled with old bookshelves and the comforting scent of freshly baked cookies, felt like a safe haven. The soft golden light from the table lamp added a layer of warmth to the room, making it feel as though everything was going to be okay, even if just for a little while. Ethan stepped inside, the sound of the door closing behind him making the outside world seem distant and unreal. Michael greeted him with a warm hug, his gentle smile offering reassurance. "I'm glad you came, Ethan," Michael said, his voice soft but steady. "You can stay here for as long as you need. You're safe now." Ethan nodded, the weight of his past few days still heavy on his chest. He sat down at the small kitchen table, feeling the tension in his body slowly begin to ease. Michael joined him, pulling out a cup of tea and setting it in front of him. The quiet clink of the mug against the saucer was strangely comforting. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes focusing on the steaming cup. "I don't know where to begin," he said, his voice shaky. "Start with what happened." "Ethan," Michael said gently, placing a hand on his shoulder, "we'll figure this out together." "And so," Ethan began. He recounted everything: the scholarship, the excitement, the hope he had felt when he thought his parents would finally see him, truly see him. He told Michael about the accusations of plagiarism, the texts from his father, the cold rejection from his family. He described how everything he had worked for, everything he had hoped for, had fallen apart in an instant. As Ethan spoke, Michael listened carefully, never interrupting, but when he heard about the strange circumstances surrounding the allegations of plagiarism, his brow furrowed with concern. "This doesn't sound right," Michael said after a long pause. "I think there's more to this than meets the eye." Ethan looked up, his heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Michael leaned back, his fingers tapping on the table thoughtfully. "I'm starting to think your family may be behind this. Richard and Laura. They've always been hard on you. But this, it feels like it's more than just favoritism. It feels like manipulation." Ethan's eyes widened. "What do you mean? Why would they do that?" Michael's voice grew serious. "I'm going to find out. I'll contact the admissions office at Worthington, and I'll see what I can do to help clear your name. But right now, I need you to trust me." "Okay," Ethan nodded, grateful for Michael's unwavering support. "Thank you. I don't know what I'd do without you." As the days passed, Michael worked behind the scenes to investigate the situation. Ethan stayed with him, trying to keep his mind occupied, but the uncertainty of everything kept him on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that his family was hiding something that could explain all the pain and betrayal. Then, one day, Ethan received a text message from an unexpected source, Ryan. The message was short, but it sent a shockwave through Ethan's chest. "We need to talk. Meet me at the Brew Haven." Ethan stared at the phone in his hand. Ryan wanted to meet. Ethan hadn't seen his twin brother in days. The silence between them had been suffocating, and now Ryan was reaching out. Michael looked up when Ethan showed him the message. "Do you want to go?" he asked, his tone careful. Ethan hesitated. Part of him wanted to confront Ryan, to demand answers for everything that had happened, but another part of him was afraid. What if Ryan was just going to turn on him again? What if this was another trap? "I'll go," Ethan said finally, standing up. "I need to know what's going on." The Brew Haven was a quiet cafe on the edge of town, with wooden tables that had seen better days and the rich smell of freshly brewed coffee filling the air. It was the kind of place where people went to talk sometimes about everything, sometimes about nothing at all. Ethan walked inside, scanning the room for Ryan. He spotted him sitting at a corner table, looking uneasy. Gone was the confident, self-assured twin that Ethan had known. Ryan's posture was slouched, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He didn't even notice Ethan approach until he was standing right in front of him. "Ryan," Ethan said, his voice tense. "What do you want?" Ryan looked up, his eyes filled with guilt and regret. "Ethan, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to fix this." Ethan sat down across from him, not sure what to say. "Fix what you've been avoiding me for days." "Ryan, what's going on?" Ryan's eyes flickered to the side, as though he was searching for the right words. Then, finally, he spoke. "I've been talking to Michael. I've told him everything. What you don't know is that everything, all of it, was orchestrated by our parents. They've been manipulating us from the start. They planted the idea of you taking the scholarship to hurt me, to make sure I stayed their golden child." Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "What? How could they do that?" Ryan looked down at his hands, guilt washing over him. "They faked the plagiarism charges. They doctored the evidence to make it look like you copied your essay. They didn't want you to succeed. They needed to keep you down, to make sure I stayed the star. They even hid your schoolwork, sabotaged your chances." Ethan felt a cold rage fill him, his hands clenching into fists. You knew, and did nothing." Ryan flinched at Ethan's anger, his voice shaking. "I didn't know what to do. Ethan, I didn't know how to stop them. But I'm sorry. I should have spoken up. I should have told you the truth sooner." Ethan's heart ached with betrayal, but somewhere deep inside, he also felt a flicker of something else, a recognition that maybe Ryan wasn't entirely to blame. Maybe he had been a victim of the same manipulation. "You're right, Ryan," Ethan said, his voice low but steady. "You should have spoken up, but you didn't. And that's why we're here now. You've been living in this house of lies, just like I have." Ryan looked up, his eyes filled with tears. "I know, and I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted any of this." Ethan leaned back, staring at his brother. The air between them felt heavy, but for the first time, Ethan didn't feel like he was facing a wall. Ryan was finally showing remorse. And maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to heal. "I'm not sure I can forgive you yet, Ryan," Ethan said softly. "But I'm willing to try. We've both been hurt. We've both been manipulated." Ryan nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "I'll do anything, Ethan. I'll help you make things right. I'll help you get the truth out there." For the first time, Ethan saw his brother not as the golden child, but as a person who had suffered too, a person who was starting to realize the truth. As the two of them sat there in the quiet cafe, the first real connection they had ever made began to form. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time, Ethan felt like there might be hope for them both. But as they parted ways, Michael's words echoed in Ethan's mind. Something bigger was coming. The Carter family was about to lose everything, and the truth was finally going to come to light. The storm was far from over. The days following Ethan's meeting with Ryan were filled with a quiet tension. As Michael dug deeper into the situation, things only became more complicated. and the truth began to surface in ways that Ethan hadn't imagined. The small town of Ohio, where everything seemed so predictable and mundane, was now a battleground for truth and lies. Ethan knew that what was coming next would change everything. One morning, Michael received a phone call that made his face pale. As soon as he hung up, he turned to Ethan, his expression grim. "They've disappeared," Michael said, his voice low, almost in disbelief. "Richard and Laura are moving to Michigan. Without telling you, they've completely cut ties." Ethan's chest tightened. He had suspected they might distance themselves from him after everything that had happened, but hearing it confirmed hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe it. His parents, the ones who had always been a constant presence, albeit a manipulative one, were now just gone. "Ryan?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Michael's eyes darkened. "Ryan's been sent to Blackwood Academy. It's a strict boarding school in Pennsylvania. They've isolated him. Ethan, they're trying to prevent him from talking to you, from connecting with anyone." Ethan felt a wave of anger wash over him. His brother, his twin, was being sent away, locked away from the truth and from the only person who could help him. But even worse, it felt like their parents were trying to erase everything. Ethan's thoughts spun as he made his way to the old Carter house. It no longer felt like his home. The familiar driveway was now occupied by a moving truck, and his stomach churned as he saw the last of his parents' things being loaded up. The place was almost empty. The house that had once held so many painful memories was now being abandoned, as if it had never mattered. He stood there for a moment, rooted to the spot, before he gathered the courage to knock on the door. Laura answered, her face as cold as ever. There was no warmth in her eyes, no hint of remorse for what she had done, just a hard, detached expression that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "You're not part of this family anymore." "Ethan," she said, her voice as icy as her demeanor. "We've made our choice." "Where's Ryan?" Ethan asked, his voice breaking. "What's going on?" Laura glanced over her shoulder at the moving truck, then back at him. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. He's gone, and so are we. You're not welcome here." Ethan's heart shattered as he stood there, looking at the woman who had given him life, the woman who had always been so cold and distant. She didn't even try to hide her disdain. He was nothing to her now. As Ethan turned to leave, he heard Richard's voice from the other side of the house, shouting something about Ethan's lack of respect. It wasn't worth listening to anymore. Ethan wasn't going to beg for their approval. Not anymore. But before he could walk away, something caught his eye. Someone was approaching. Tyler, Ryan's roommate from Blackwood Academy, was walking toward him, his face tense with urgency. Tyler stopped in front of Ethan, his eyes scanning the surroundings before he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a small USB drive. "This is from Ryan," Tyler said, his voice low. "He wanted me to give this to you. He doesn't know what else to do, but he wants you to have it." Ethan took the USB with trembling hands, confusion and hope swirling inside him. He didn't know what this was, but it was from Ryan. That was all that mattered. Tyler nodded briefly before turning and walking away, leaving Ethan standing there, clutching the small device. Later that night, Michael and Ethan sat together in the quiet of Michael's house. Michael plugged the USB into his laptop and began going through the files. What they found was shocking. The first file was an audio recording, one that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. It was Richard and Laura, talking casually, but with a venom that made Ethan's blood run cold. "Ethan needs to know his place." Richard's voice was heard clearly. "Only Ryan is deserving of success. If Ethan keeps up this nonsense, we'll have to teach him a lesson. He can't just take things from Ryan." Laura's voice followed, cold and calculating. "We'll make sure he understands. He's always been in the way. Ryan needs to be number one, and if Ethan gets in the way, we'll handle it." Ethan felt his stomach churn as he listened. The anger he had been holding back, the hurt, the betrayal, everything surged to the surface. His parents had done this. They had manipulated him, sabotaged his future, and used Ryan to keep him in the shadows. But the recordings didn't stop there. There were more files. Ryan's journal, filled with painful entries from when they were young. Ethan's schoolwork had been hidden, assignments taken from him, and his grades intentionally lowered by Richard and Laura. Even worse, Ethan's achievements, his awards, his recognition had been destroyed, hidden away so that Ryan could shine. One audio file left Ethan breathless. It was Richard, speaking to Laura with chilling calmness. "If Ethan succeeds," Richard's voice said coldly, "Ryan will no longer be the star. We can't let that happen." The words burned into Ethan's mind. His entire life, everything he had worked for, had been manipulated, sabotaged by the very people who should have loved him the most. It wasn't just favoritism. It was control, a twisted form of power that had shaped his entire existence. Michael turned to him, his face grim. "This is it, Ethan. We have everything we need." Ethan could hardly breathe as he processed the weight of it all. He had been living in a house of lies, a house built on manipulation, and now, With this evidence, he had the power to tear it down. The next day, Michael hired a lawyer, Rachel, who began preparing the case. They gathered all the evidence: Ryan's journal, the audio recordings, the testimonies. Everything pointed to the truth. Ethan's family had tried to destroy him, but now he had the truth on his side. In court, the tension was palpable. Richard and Laura had filed for a restraining order, accusing Ethan of threatening them. But Rachel, with the evidence they had collected, tore their lies apart. The recordings, the documents, the testimony from Tyler. It was all there. Ethan sat in the courtroom, his heart racing, his hands trembling. He had no idea how this would end, but for the first time in his life, he was standing up for himself. He wasn't going to let them control him anymore. The judge, after hearing all the evidence, turned to Richard and Laura. "This is an abuse of power," he said firmly. "The evidence is clear. Ethan Carter is free to live his life without the manipulation of his parents." Ethan felt the weight of the words settle over him. The judge's ruling wasn't just a legal victory, it was his freedom. The chains that had bound him for so long were finally broken. When the judge ruled, Ethan felt a strange calm wash over him. The truth was out, and it couldn't be hidden anymore. As he left the courthouse, he received a text from Ryan. "We'll make this right. I'll be here. I promise." Ethan smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in his life, he felt free. The truth had come to light, and it had set him free. And maybe, just maybe, he and Ryan could rebuild what had been broken between them. Ethan stood in front of the familiar wooden door of Michael's house, the one that had become his sanctuary over the past few months. It wasn't much small, cozy, and filled with the comforting scent of old books and fresh coffee, but it was the first place in his life where he truly felt safe. After the legal victory that had freed him from his family's manipulations, Ethan knew that this was where he belonged. The judge's decision to grant him full legal freedom had been a weight lifted from his shoulders. It wasn't just about the documents, the evidence, or the court ruling. It was the realization that he could finally live life on his own terms, no longer controlled by the expectations of Richard and Laura, no longer trapped in their twisted games. Michael had become more than just a godfather to Ethan. He was the father figure Ethan had always needed, the family he had longed for but never had. In this home, Ethan found peace, a peace he hadn't known existed. And it wasn't just about survival anymore. Ethan was starting to thrive. The news about Worthington University was just as life-changing. The scholarship had been restored, thanks to the evidence Michael had gathered, and Ethan was accepted to attend. He had worked so hard for this moment, and it was finally real. It wasn't just a victory over his parents, it was his own success, his own moment to shine. His pride wasn't just in the scholarship, it was in knowing that he had earned it, despite all the obstacles in his way. As the months passed, Ethan's life began to take on a rhythm that felt new and promising. The first day of classes at Worthington was approaching, and Ethan was nervous, but not in the same way he had been in the past. This was his chance to build a future, to be someone he was proud of, no longer defined by the shadows of his past. But there was still the matter of his relationship with Ryan. Despite everything that had happened, despite the betrayal, Ethan couldn't shake the bond he had with his twin brother. They were family, and deep down, Ethan knew that family, real family, was about understanding, forgiveness, and moving forward. Ryan had stayed at Blackwood Academy, but their communication had improved in ways Ethan hadn't expected. They spoke every day, through video calls, emails, and texts. The conversations were raw, honest, and sometimes painful, but there was growth in those moments. Ryan, once so sure of his place in their family, was now questioning everything. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting golden light through Michael's windows, Ethan sat down with his phone. He clicked on a video call from Ryan. The screen blinked for a second before Ryan's face appeared. "Hey, bro," Ryan said, a sheepish smile on his face. "It's been a while." Ethan smiled back. "Yeah, it has. I've been busy. But we need to talk." Ryan's eyes flickered with something Ethan couldn't quite read. "I know. I've been doing a lot of thinking, Ethan, and I've realized something." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What?" Ryan paused for a moment, his face serious now. "I used to think that being loved was a privilege, that it was something you had to earn. But now I see it was a trap, a way for Mom and Dad to control us, to make us feel like we had to be their version of perfect." Ethan nodded slowly, the words hitting him harder than he had expected. "I felt that, too. I spent so much of my life trying to be good enough for them, but I never was." Ryan shook his head. "No, none of us were. And I'm sorry. Ethan, I should have spoken up sooner. I should have done more." Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. Ryan was admitting his faults, and though it didn't erase the past, it meant something. "It's not just your fault. Ryan, they manipulated both of us. You didn't know any better." "I should have known," Ryan said quietly, "but I was too blind to see it. I was too caught up in trying to stay the golden child." Ethan leaned forward, his voice soft but firm. You're not the golden child anymore. Ryan, you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be yourself. Ryan smiled, a real smile this time, though it was laced with sadness. I'm trying. Ethan, I really am. They talked for hours that night. They shared memories of their childhood, both the good and the bad, and slowly began to rebuild what had been broken. The distance between them, the silence that had stretched for years, began to shrink. A few days later, Ethan received a letter from Ryan. It was handwritten, something Ryan had rarely done before. The letter read, Ethan, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. I should have been there for you. I should have stood up to Mom and Dad. I was afraid, and I let that fear control me. But I'm not afraid anymore. I'm going to be better. For you. For me. For us. I'll always be here for you, no matter what. I hope one day we can rebuild what we lost. I'll be the brother you deserve, and I'll never make the same mistake again. Ryan's words hit Ethan harder than any apology had ever before. He could feel the sincerity in them. His brother was finally becoming the person Ethan had always hoped he could be. Ethan held the letter to his chest, a tear slipping down his cheek. He had spent so many years wishing for his family to change, wishing for Ryan to see him as an equal, and now, for the first time, it felt like that dream was starting to come true. The next few months were a blur of preparation. Ethan moved into his dorm at Worthington University, his excitement growing with every step he took toward this new chapter. He was proud of himself, he was free, but he didn't forget where he had come from. And he didn't forget Ryan. Ryan, too, was making strides. He stayed at Blackwood, but he began to question everything he had been taught. He worked through his guilt, through the realization that his family's toxic love had been a trap. He started to build a new future for himself, one that didn't revolve around being someone's favorite. One final day. As Ethan stood on the steps of Worthington University, looking out at the vast campus stretching before him, he felt the sun warm on his face. He held his phone in his hand, reading a message from Ryan. We'll be okay. Little brother. Ethan smiled and looked up at Michael, who stood beside him, proud and steady. We did it. Ethan, Michael said softly. You did it. And I couldn't be prouder of you. Ethan felt a swell of emotion rise within him. I couldn't have done it without you. Michael smiled. That's what family is for. As Ethan looked out at the sprawling campus, the future finally felt wide open. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, he was ready for it. He had his brother, his godfather, and a newfound sense of self-worth. He wasn't defined by his past. He wasn't the boy who had been manipulated. He was Ethan Carter, a young man with a future he could finally claim as his own. And with that, the weight of everything that had come before seemed to lift, leaving only hope for what was yet to come.